Kawau Island in the Hauraki Gulf has been called the biggest small community in the world. There are only 85 full-time residents spread out over 9 miles of coastline on the western side of the island, along with a handful of holiday homes and 73 jetties. That's about 1 per person. A friend brought me to Kawau not long after arriving from the UK. Within 2 days, I shot a gun, used a chainsaw, jumped off the wharf, fished off the rocks and cooked on an open fire. These were experiences that I never had when I was growing up in the UK, but I love it so much knowing that my children will have these experiences as their memories. Nowadays, coming to Kawau feels like coming home, and I'm not the only lucky one who feels that way about the place. In this episode of Neighbourhood, we'll meet a woman whose spiritual journey has brought her full circle.
I didn't know who I really was. I was incredibly lonely a lot of the time. I used to come back here when I could to ground, and I always knew that this is where I wanted to be.
A Kawau local shares the skills he honed in the work camps of Holland after World War II.
My days are usually 12 hours non-stop work. But I'm always glad if I can help somebody, but I don't do anything for myself.
Descendants of Kawau's most famous resident debate his legacy.
It's just an amazing thing that he took her under his wing when she was only 10 or 12, because, you know, she was an illegitimate child to his half-brother. And in those days, most illegitimate children would have been kicked to the curbstone.
And we'll meet a woman from America who circled the globe twice before deciding Kawau was home.
One day, I just felt like my life was a bit stagnant. I tired of the guys I was dating. They were all university types, all far too serious. And I just decided I wanted to buy a sailboat and learn about sailing.
I'm Gareth Stewart, and this is my neighbourhood. My mother's from the East Midlands in England. My dad's from Jamaica. He came over to the UK when he was 8. When he arrived, people were convinced that they were coming over to take their jobs, so racism was rife. My parents taught me to stand up to all oppression, not just what we experienced ourselves. My dad was a policeman who earned a lot of respect in the force, despite the obvious racism. But I'm grateful to both my parents. They've helped me navigate some pretty stormy seas.
I had no ocean experience, no sailing experience, really. But one day, I just felt like my life was a bit stagnant. I tired of the guys I was dating. They were all university types, all far too serious. And I just decided I wanted to buy a sailboat and learn about sailing. Long story short, I met Larry, who was a charter captain at the time. We started chatting, and he was building a boat, a sailboat. And I moved in with him 3 days later and helped him build his boat. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and grew up in California, just north of Los Angeles in the desert. Actually was sort of a desert rat. I first met Larry on our first real date, because we actually did date for 3 days. He was explaining to me about this boat he was building, and it was just an amazing afternoon of learning about his dream. And as I was saying goodbye, I said, "You just showed me a wonderful, wonderful day. I just had a great day." And he says, "Well, stick with me, baby, and you'll go a long way." Well, he lived up to that promise. He really did. I was young, I was 20. I wanted adventure. It was a huge change, but it was an exciting change because first I was learning to build things. learning to sail, but I was doing something that was exactly what I dreamed of doing when I grew up. I just wanted to be different, and being at sea and learning to sail a boat was different and, of course, led to amazing adventures. But always we learned to watch out for each other, make each other look good. And he showed me that right from the beginning. From the first day I met him, that was his attitude towards having a partner. We paid for our adventures right from the beginning by delivering boats for other people. Larry was a very good rigger. There's always people needing repairs to their boats as you're sailing. And that's how we did it for the first several years. My writing then kicked in, and then Larry started writing some technical articles about sailing. The joke that we always used to say is that I told the stories and he told the truth. Larry wrote very practical articles and how-to. In fact, he wrote a complete book on boat building, which I did all the editing for. But I wrote the narrative stories. But then Larry was always backing me up with the technical advice. And that's what made our books work for the sailors. Over 45 years, we sailed the equivalent of 3 times around the world. 75 different countries. We actually worked in 19 different countries, restoring boats, doing boat repairs. It couldn't have been better. After about 20 years of sailing together, we sailed into New Zealand just to visit friends down here. We'd never been to New Zealand before. And it just enchanted us. And we actually came down to Kawau Island to join in on the anniversary regatta. And the night after we got here, a westerly gale blew in. We sailed around to North Cove to get protection from the wind. And the next morning, Larry looked around and he said to me, "Lynn, if I could find a little piece of land in this cove where there was just some room to do some boat building, it would be perfect for when we decide to retire someday." And 3 months later, we found this place. He bought me a little 15-foot day sailor. It's a keeler. It's a little Nat Herreshoff keeler that I enjoy sailing around here. But Larry's, unfortunately, at the age of 78, has had to go into care. His memory has gone pretty badly. But, you know, 6 months before, when his mind was still better and with it, I said to him, "Don't you wish we could go on one more adventure, be planning one more crazy stunt?" And he says, "That would be downright greedy." Of course, I wish Larry could have continued past his 77 years being my partner full-time, but not many people had 48 years of just about the perfect partner.
This is Mansion House Bay, once home to Governor George Grey. He stocked his estates with exotic plants and animals from across the empire, like zebras, peacocks, monkeys, and wallabies. Kawau was like a microcosm of how the British Empire viewed the colonial world in the 1800s. Theirs for the taking. I have a family tree on my father's side that dates back to the slave trade in Jamaica. I think it's strange to think that not so long ago, my ancestors were slaves. We're still trying to find out exactly where in Africa we originally came from. I think it's really important to acknowledge our links to the past.
Didn't have much of a younger life. I was adopted out, but it didn't work out, so I complained about it, and then they shoved me in the workhouse. Oh, the workhouse was all right. It was just all boys that had no parents, or parents got killed during the war. And I decided I wanted to be a carpenter. They found me a place where I could serve my apprenticeship. And I don't teach you a lot. You learn by watching. It wasn't long before I left Holland. Post-war Holland. It was horrible. No food. You were pinching potato skins from the German mobile cooks. Give them a wash and cook them. When I left Holland, well, I didn't know what the heck I was coming to, you know. I thought, well, gonna need tools.
My children, Zane and Jacob, they loved spending time with Grandad. He's one of the biggest part of the community, I think, here. So we have our magazine, The Kookaburra, and he's in every episode for I don't know how long, into everything to do with the island.
Grandad, do you want to catch a snapper?
Well, I got sick of building. Got a license. I'm in commercial fishing for about 2.5 years. And that's why we moved to Kawau, about 37 years ago. I was doing quite good. But the trouble was, the people on Kawau found out I was a builder, and that was the finish of the fishing.
He's one of those people that you can call with any issue at all. So like on Friday nights, he'll get phone calls. They've just arrived at the beach about 8:30. Oh, the hot water cylinder's blown. So George goes over there and sorts it and orders their new one, and it's in by the next day, or everything and anything he's fixing.
Go on, Sage.
That was that!
Bye, lads.
Bye-bye, Grandad!
My days are usually 12 hours, non-stop work. And I'm always glad if I can help somebody. And, anything from clearing sections, helping somebody with a sun deck, or putting a kitchen in for someone. But I don't do anything for myself. My wife passed away not long ago, and so I live here on my own now. But I don't get lonely. I like the water. I like the sunsets, people.
My wife Robin and I run a boat club. The old building was pretty difficult when we first arrived, and we're complete novices and knew nothing about this place. And from day one, if I ever had a problem, whether it was with a toilet or the hot water cylinders or the showers, George would be here in his tin boat within 10 or 15 minutes with a bag of old bits and pieces and would sort our problem out. He has looked after us beautifully since we've been here.
It's our favourite.
He usually likes to put brandy in his coffee.
We haven't had the privilege, as a lot of people on Kawau have, to have George in their lives for a long period of time, but he certainly made an impact on our life, and I just hold him in the highest regard and think it's an absolute privilege to have met him.
I think New Zealand is one of the most beautiful countries. I've been lucky. I've seen a lot of it. And I think it's stunning. New Zealand given me a lot, and I'm always glad to give something back.
So netting's a bit of a ritual on Kawau Island. Every morning we'll come down and we'll throw some bait out and hopefully bring back some beautiful piper. There's a fish that's really underrated by Kiwis, and it's just great for throwing on the barbecue or even chopping up raw in a bit of ceviche. So I really look forward to netting when I come to Kawau. I've always been fascinated by food, At a young age, I'd go to the supermarket with Mum, and I'd always spend a lot of time just staring at the fish at the fishmongers. I was baking cakes with Mum, and by 7 or 8, I was cooking the family dinner. At 16, I left school and began my career as a chef. I've been really lucky with my career path, and now I'm lucky enough to work in some of the finest restaurants in Auckland. But sometimes life takes a circular path and brings you back to where you need to be.
Part of being on Kawau, this beautiful community that I live in, is coming home, coming to the place that I feel the happiest in, that I feel the most me, that I can hear my heart and be amongst nature. I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky. There on a branch with a blossom of red, Tui is calling, so pure and so true. You can choose freedom and love, she says. I show the way with my voice when I play, for Tui is calling me. I started off at law school, and then my sister died, and I decided, you know what, life's pretty short. I hate law school. The only thing that appealed to me about law was the, you know, ladies and gentlemen of the court, the theatricality of it. So I then went off to Toi Whakaari, the New Zealand Drama School. I pretty much got snapped up immediately into the world of international musical theatre, which I lasted about 7 years, developed a bit of a drug habit. I was very unhappy. I hadn't dealt with my sister's death. I didn't know who I really was. I was incredibly lonely a lot of the time. I was always the person in rehearsal who was wearing bare feet and going to the parks and looking to get to the beach or to go horse riding or do something with nature, and often it was like, oh, she's a bit strange, you know. So I alienated myself, and I also felt very alienated. I used to come back here when I could to ground, and I always knew that this is where I wanted to be. Those times were rough. They were hiding from who I was through being someone else. Acting on stage as someone else meant I didn't have to deal with my problems. My family have owned Kahutakawa Bay, a quarter point of Kawau Island, since 1952. Growing up here as a child was absolute paradise. We spent all day in the sea. We were pretty feral, feet tough enough to walk on oysters, chasing wallabies, you know, listening to the tui, swimming with dolphins occasionally. So it was paradise. Swimming in the bay off our wharf, which still looks exactly the same. This whole point still looks exactly the same. The boat shed's still the same. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful times. I was never going to be happy full-time on a stage. I was never going to be happy full-time in a recording studio. I was never going to be happy touring the world as a travelling artist. That was a life that I tried for a little while, and I'm a nature girl. You know, I need to be amongst the trees and the birds and living in a way where I can go out into the world from a place of stillness. When I met Simon, we were partying hard. But then we both put ourselves through Higher Ground, which is the drug and alcohol rehab treatment centre in Auckland. Both Simon and I went through that journey to realise why we were self-destructing with drugs. And it was grief, but it was also a deep disconnect from who I was. We basically made the decision to change our lives quite radically. We were both in our very late 30s, early 40s, and that was the time we went, okay, we're going to go and live on Kawau. It's where we'd been married. It's where my sister is. This is where we had to be. This is my home, my soul home. this incredible deck, this view, this beauty and simplicity.
And being so high up on the
being so
face,
high up,
we
absolutely.
get the wind, we get the
this
birds,
view.
we get the sky, we get the sea.
And incredibly lucky that I happened to marry a man who, or fall in love, and then marry a man who wanted this as well.
It took a long time for us to get back to a point where we were comfortable with the world again. Our crutches had been taken away and we needed to learn to walk again, and that took some time, but we got there, and now we've got this wonderful life on this island.
Yeah, we're very, very blessed.
A Jamaican barbecue is serious stuff. Food has a massive part to play in any occasion. There's always jerk chicken, jerk pork, rice and peas, fried dumpling, hardo bread and pickled fish. There's just so much music and laughter. It's a good time. My dad was one of 9 kids, so it's quite a big family on that side. And with all the cousins in the house, it made for a massive occasion. Kawau doesn't have many permanent residents, but it does have a family whose roots here go back 3 generations.
The first time I came here, we landed at Schoolhouse Bay and we walked down the old coach road, and it was just an amazing feeling actually to walk down there and to think that my great-grandmother and Sir George Grey and my grandfather and all his siblings were probably up and down the old coach road all the time. That's the Thorn George Wing up there, Sally, where your great-grandmother lived. And it is amazing thinking that it was our family home.
I know, it's strange coming here with it as a public building, knowing that's where the grandmothers and grandparents grew up, you know. We are descendants of Annie Matthews, and Annie Matthews was Sir George Grey's niece. Sir George Grey was a young man sent out by the English colonial government. First of all, he was the governor of South Australia before being sent here in 1845 to be the 3rd governor of New Zealand. For the Europeans and for the early settlers, he was seen as a governor put in place to manage the attainment of land for those settlers to live on. For Māori, he's seen as a figure that came in and forcefully confiscated land, and that had an impact for future generations as well. So he's very much a polarising figure. Sir George Grey found himself in New Zealand. His wife was in England, and his only son or child born from that marriage had passed away in Australia. So he found himself in New Zealand with no wife and no children. Sir George Grey adopted Annie Matthews and brought her here to live with him on Kawau Island on the death of both of her parents, who were unmarried at the time that they had her. I love this portrait. It's the only colour portrait that we've got of Annie.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. So was that painted in England? When she
The actual portrait of Annie was done in England when she was 16, when she was presented at court.
Yeah.
But the background was put on. That's the Juliet stairs.
Yeah, out the back.
Yeah, that was put in when they came back to Kawau.
I think she would have had a great time growing up here. She had a well-educated upbringing. She had a vast library, you know, at her fingertips from Sir George Grey's private collection, and the artworks as well. So she had quite a well-rounded upbringing. Yeah, definitely wasn't isolated over here.
Absolutely not. It would have been fantastic living here. And by all accounts, Sir George Grey absolutely doted on her. Yeah, treated her like his daughter.
Absolutely. Right, here's the bedroom.
And I just imagine
Annie
sitting there. She was a very loving niece to Sir George Grey because she wrote a lot of letters to him, particularly once he had gone back to London. And she always addressed him as, you know, my dear uncle. your loving niece. So that was their relationship. It's just an amazing thing that he took her under his wing when she was only 10 or 12, because, you know, she was an illegitimate child to his half-brother. And in those days, most illegitimate children would have been kicked to the curbstone, whereas he just embraced her as family.
I've got stories from my grandmother. She remembers sitting at the knee of Annie.
Oh, does she?
Yeah.
Wow.
And she remembers her as a very stern woman. But as my grandmother said, she'd had 9 children, so what do you expect? Ah, so this is the bedroom.
Yeah, this is Sir George Grey's room. This is actually Sir George Grey's bed.
Oh, wow, the original
Yeah,
bed.
it's the original bed.
Wow.
Which was lost for some years. And someone found it again in a shed or something like that. So it's really great to have it back.
Yeah. I've just spotted these brushes, which are Sir George Grey's personal clothes brushes that my grandmother had, and she gifted back to the house a few years ago. I think they're pig's bristle, and that's what used to brush down his coat.
Wow.
It's lovely to have him back in the house.
It is. This is the withdrawing room. That is the correct term that they used back in the 1800s, because you actually withdrew in here after dinner.
Sir George Grey's niece, Annie Matthews, who married Seymour Thorne George, who was the estate manager here on the island, it was in this room here that Grey married Annie and Seymour, with everyone present on the island coming to celebrate, and it was quite a big event.
Well, I find it amazing visiting the house, actually, just because it's got so much of my family history in it. I sort of see it as a personal thing, thinking of my grandfather and great-grandmother living here. Yeah, apart from it being the home of the Governor of New Zealand.
Sir George Grey would appreciate the fact that the house itself had been maintained and returned to its original form. And the fact that we're sitting here today, being able to talk about it, I think he'd be quite chuffed about that. Yeah.
Yeah, defender.
Yeah.
When I arrived in New Zealand, it wasn't so foreign to me, although I had to get used to a few things. Like the Kiwi sense of humour, it is different. And so's the life-to-work balance, in a good way. Here I take off my shoes, turn off my phone, and nothing goes back on until I have to leave.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.